Next will be Dr. Audrey Truschke, who is an associate professor of South Asian history at Rutgers University in Newark, New Jersey. Her research interests cover from pre-modernity into modern times, often emphasizing Hindu-Muslim interactions, cultural history, and the politics of the past. Please, Audrey, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all my panelists and co-panelists and to everyone for being here, and especially warm thanks to Rohit for organizing all of this. So the title of my paper today is Caste Control Towards a Frank Reckoning of Who Represents Hinduism in History. So basically what I want to do is, among many other things in life, but right now, I want to think about how caste, often Brahmanical hegemony, specifically mediates who gets to represent and claim Hinduism at specific points in history. And I'm specifically interested in pre-modernity. That's partly because of my training and general inclinations, but also because it is comparatively understudied and it presents different issues than for modernity. And one issue worth flagging at the outset is that, in my opinion, it is more difficult in certain ways to access non-elite perspectives for pre-modernity. Okay, we have to work and think about how to work creatively and honestly with the sources that we do have available for understanding pre-modern Hindu traditions. Now, I've not quite yet figured out how to do that. So what I'm going to offer here to you all is a set of 4 fragments that sort of look at different aspects of how caste mediates what we claim to know about pre-modern Hindu traditions and who counts as Hindu. So fragment 1, the Brahmin firewall. I have absolutely no idea how to write about Hindu traditions in the early century CE. So this is about 2000 to 1500 years ago, from a lower caste perspective. As we have it at present in the historiography, this is basically a straight up Brahmanical story. So think of dharma, a core, if obviously not an exclusive, Hindu concept. If you want to know what dharma was about 2000 years ago, you could look at the Dharma Shastra texts, specifically the Dharma Sutras. You might look to the epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata. Dharma is not quite as key of a concept in Vedic texts, but you could try. You could look at the Upanishads or even the Brahmanas or some other slightly later Vedic connected work. Now, I just listed a whole bunch of Sanskrit texts. Every single one of those was authored by upper caste men and gives us a decidedly upper caste male perspective. Now, if I have any Sanskritists in the audience, especially warm welcome. But also you might object, especially vis-a-vis the epics, that they cannot be so easily reduced to a single viewpoint. I would agree. There are diverse perspectives therein, but I'm not so sure that they're diverse in terms of caste. We can find passages about lower caste individuals like Shambhuka in the Ramayana or Ekalavya in the Mahabharata, but there's nothing clearly by or from the point of view of a lower caste person. Now, at a slightly later date, the Mahabharata gets dubbed the 5th Veda, okay, specifically the Veda for women and for Shudras. Now, this is a slightly later idea. It doesn't go back 2000 years, but still consider the inbuilt exclusion. There is no point in pre-modern Indian history, or frankly, in modern Indian history, where the 4 Vedas are intended for the ears of the majority of Hindus. They're always delimited, in theory anyways, by gender and by caste. Fragment 2, is caste Hindu? So that question, is caste Hindu, provokes great modern anxiety. Rather than answer it, I want to point out that that tension is entirely a modern phenomenon. If we could put the query to, say, Manu, the purported author of a foundational work of Sanskrit ethics, Dharma Shastra, right? And he was writing around the 2nd to 3rd century CE. Manu would answer with a proud and resounding, yes, absolutely, caste is our dharma. Manu elaborated his core thesis over hundreds of pages of Sanskrit, and his basic thesis is that all men are created unequal. Each has their own duty as per a hereditary social class. So Shudras serve, Vaishyas farm, Kshatriyas govern and fight. But Manu reserves most of his attention and essentially all of his admiration for Brahmins, the creme de la creme of humanity in his worldview. He discourses on the excellence of the Brahmin. He issues repeated variations on the maxim, and I quote, "Brahmins should be honored in every way, for they are the highest deity." Is this Hinduism? Now, Manu would not have used that term, and I'll come to why in a moment. But if we could explain the modern term Hinduism to Manu, how would he answer? He wouldn't answer me at all, as both because I'm a woman and I'm a Videshi. Okay, so I'm just going to skim over Manu's extreme misogyny here. But ignoring that, I think Manu would answer yes, that adherence to a pyramid-like caste system that champions inequality is Hinduism. But that's Manu. Should we call this Hinduism? If we're talking about Manu's religious ideas, then yes, I think we should. To be honest, to the past, no matter how upsetting it is in our present. But what about other groups' religious practices? Because my friends, Manu was not the only man in town. So fragment 3, can rejecting caste be Hindu? Pre-modern Hindus did not usually call themselves Hindu. As all pre-modern scholars know, Hindu is a Perso-Arabic term that in pre-modernity referred to residents of India as often as it referred to practitioners of a religious tradition. Hindus only began to refer to themselves as such regularly and widely in the 19th century. Even sporadic self-referential uses of the term Hindu only date back to the 14th century at the earliest. Now, the absence of a term is not the absence of a thing. But the disconnect in vocabulary means that when scholars or anybody else talks about Hindus and Hinduism before about 1800, we have to define at the outset who we include within that identity and tradition. Many academics use caste norms to make that determination. So for instance, a brilliant colleague of mine and of all of us, Elaine Fisher, noted in her 2017 book that early Shaivas rejected the Vedas and they did not honor Varnashrama Dharma, and all the time they were engaging in non-Brahmanical practices. And as a result, she argued that Shaivism, and I quote, during this formative period was functionally independent from any parent religion we may wish to describe as Hinduism. I concur with Dr. Fisher as a matter of scholarly practice. But if we take a step back, it seems to me that we are collectively promoting a Hinduism as defined by caste privilege viewpoints and then excluding those who dissent. What would happen if we were to rethink that circular logic? I think probably what would happen is we would confront problems in the present. Some among an earlier generation of scholars were absolutely lambasted by the Hindu right for their interest in the Vama, the left-hand parts of pre-modern Hindu traditions that, among other things, frequently disregarded caste boundaries. But academically, why not? Why not consider a more diverse array of texts and practices within pre-modern Hindu traditions instead of assuming the definitional primacy of Brahmanical purity and hegemony? The answer to that question of why not is that to do so, to say, call the early Shaivas Hindu, would change the narrative of the history of Hinduism to which we are all accustomed. I think it would change it quite a lot. And I don't know if we're all ready for that. Fragment 4, modernity at last. So when all of us really, but especially when I speak about pre-modern Hinduism, I do so most often from within the United States, okay, complete with an Indian American diaspora that is several million strong and growing. Indian Americans are the most upper caste community that have ever existed. Okay, as many of you know, their demographics skew heavily upper caste overall as compared to Indian residents as a group. And that's due to two combined things. One is US immigration policies that heavily favor skilled migrants from South Asia, coupled with caste inequalities built up over generations. Now, some within the Indian American community push back against scholars like me who want to diversify our study of South Asian history and Hinduism. And I want to say two things to contextualize that pushback. One is that in seeking to describe a broader, more diverse history of Hinduism, I am cutting against the personal experiences of many within the upper caste dominated Indian American diaspora. Now, that's not a problem for me because I'm not trying to describe the histories of diasporic American Hinduism alone. Often I'm not trying to describe that sort of Hinduism at all. And so here we all do need to check our modern biases. Any one person's Hinduism in 21st century America cannot and should not exert control over the recovery of Hinduisms in the Indian past. Two is there's the modern issue of caste. Now, you all know caste is not confined to the dustbin of history, rather it's a present day issue as well. Studies show that many Indian Americans identify with and continue caste practices, including through marriage restrictions, right, which is one of the bedrocks of the hereditary caste system. Recent high-profile cases, like the raid on a Baptist temple in southern New Jersey that found dozens of Dalit indentured servants, make it painfully clear that caste-based oppression is an American problem. I think that the ire that frank discussions of caste can arouse is perhaps prompted by the fear that seeing caste prejudice in the past may highlight its persistence in our present. So in very brief conclusion, caste control in the past and in the present has exerted, in my opinion, too great of an influence on the academic study of pre-modern Hinduism. I want to try for a different narrative that is more honest to the past, even while it remains highly challenging in our present. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Audrey. I think in your fragments you point very importantly to the work that Dr. Ambedkar would frame as an ontological critique of forms of knowledge. And I think here, both in thinking about what the current world, what pressures it put on those of us who study deep Indian past, has to be taken into account as we begin to kind of reframe